Welcome to Running for Real, a global community with a shared love and curiosity for running. Together we reconnect with the reasons why we love to run and discover ways it helps us become better people. Whether it's the quiet moments of a morning run while the rest of the world still sleeps, or befriending the strangers next to you at the start line of a race, we are here to connect with others who see running as the common thread that weaves our lives together. Come join me, Tina Muir, as I talk with people from all walks of life, united by a love of running. Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 368 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for joining me. I am excited that you are here, but I know someone else is excited that you are here, and that is guest host and for Real-Isodes co-host, Sarah Crouch. Sarah is going to be the one hosting this interview today, and she did, as she always does, a fantastic job when she does a guest takeover for this episode, and her guests today were Zoe and I. We wanted to do a bit of a different episode. Sarah always has such thoughtful questions. She read the book herself and then wanted to ask questions based on what she had come up with. And she had texted me many times throughout reading that certain parts had spoken to her. So I really looked forward to this conversation. It was beautiful to have this conversation between two of my close friends in Sarah and in Zoe. And I hope you're going to enjoy this episode. I know you're going to enjoy this episode. Sarah does have a book coming out herself next year, which I will be excited to highlight very soon. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah Crouch for today's episode with myself and Zoë Rom. I want to thank our friends over at 2Before for sponsoring this episode. 2Before contains blackcurrants. Blackcurrants are berries that have been scientifically proven to increase cardiovascular endurance, speed up muscle recovery, reduce inflammation, and support immunity. And studies have shown that New Zealand blackcurrants can improve athletic performance by 4.6%. And as someone who has to squeeze in things constantly, I do not have the flexibility to be able to throw in my workouts whenever I want them. They just have to go where they go, and that means I have to be ready on cue. That is where I've been using 2Before as my pre-workout. A single serving of 2Before contains 120 milligrams of blackcurrant anthocyanins, and that is proven to deliver performance and recovery benefits. So as someone who has been recovering from an injury over the past few months, I have been taking a lot of 2Before to support me in my other workouts and support me along my journey, speeding up that recovery, and as I get back to running, improving my endurance. I want to encourage you as a friend of mine to go check out 2before.com. That's the number 2before.com, and use code TINA. That will get you 30% off. You can mix it with any drink, just one scoop in your water or whatever else you want to take it in, and you will start feeling the benefits. And I just want to mention blackcurrant. If you've never had that flavor, it's kind of sweet, kind of tangy. It is a wonderful flavor. I love it. It reminds me of my childhood. You should check it out. Go to 2before.com and use code TINA at checkout to get yourself 30% off. Hi friends, I just want to jump in here quickly to let you know about some upcoming dates that I have where I will be for the Becoming a Sustainable Runner book tour, if you want to call it that. So New York City, if you are available on September 18th at the New York Roadrunners Run Center, there will be an event there. There will also be events coming at the Chicago Marathon, at the Toronto Waterfront Marathon, in Phoenix, Arizona at the end of October for the New York City Marathon, and at CIM. If you are going to be at any of those events, go to runningforreal.com, sign up for the newsletter. I will give you all the information there. You can also find it on social media. I encourage you to go check that out. I would love to see you at one of those events soon. All right, let's get back to the episode.
My name is Sarah Crouch. And the reason that you're hearing my voice right now and not Tina's is because I will actually be interviewing Tina and Zoe on their brand new book, Becoming a Sustainable Runner. So Tina, of course, needs no introduction. You know her, you love her, but in case you haven't heard of Zoe, let me tell you just a little bit about her. She is not only the editor-in-chief of Trail Runner magazine, she is also the host of the DNF podcast, and she has won many prestigious ultra marathons such as the Crested Butte 100K, many others, and in such a crazy small community feel. Zoe, did you know your next race, the 100 mile you're doing, you'll actually be racing with my sister, Georgia. You guys will hopefully be up there competing for the win. What a small world,
nice.
Right?
That's awesome. I mean, one of the reasons I signed up for that event is because it just always attracts such an amazing field of particularly female runners.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah. The trail running community is something else, and actually, the running community in general is a great segue to introducing your book. So, for those who haven't got their hands on a copy yet, do either of you want to just tell me what the book is about?
Zoe, go ahead. I've heard it from me.
Yeah. So the book is called Becoming a Sustainable Runner. And it's basically about how all runners can sustain their own running, can better connect with their community, and can better sustain their planet. And it also, I think, the reason that it sort of tackles those three topics is because we really wanted to make the case that they're all inextricably interlinked, right? You can't think about your own health without also considering the health of your community and your planet. Likewise, if you're trying to sustain a planet without trying to sustain thriving, healthy communities and thriving, healthy individuals, you're missing out on a big piece of the puzzle. So we really wanted to sort of make the case that these three things are all necessarily depend on one another, and make the case that all runners should be equally invested in their own health, their community's health, and the health of their planet.
Mm-hmm. Tina, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, Zoe always explains that beautifully. And, the listeners have heard me talking about it a lot. And I guess just one thing I want to hone in on is it's called Becoming for a reason. We're not perfect at this in any of the areas. And we don't expect you to be. So becoming, because we're all on this journey together. And that's the point we really wanted to get across.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to take you back to sort of the genesis of this book. So whenever I see a book that has two authors as a co-author, I always wonder, okay, who came up with the idea? How did this this book become, what it is? So please talk me through that process from the very first seed of an idea to sort of its writing and conception.
Well, it's definitely Tina's idea originally. But I think one of the beautiful things about co-authoring something is that when you bring in two people who have different opinions, ideas, but pretty spot on, shared similar values, you get different sort of approaches, and you get kind of more of a triangulation of ideas. So you take this kernel that was very much Tina's baby, and it gets to be nurtured and grown and developed into something that's more than any one mind could ever do.
Yeah. And I know, Zoe, for you in particular, your writing history, it goes back a long time. You've been a writer for a really long time. But Tina, have you always wanted to be a writer? Is this something you've always wanted to do?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, you both know this very well, being two of my closest friends. I have always had what I feel comes naturally to me is maybe sharing what's going on in the inside, whereas for most people, that's kind of a challenging thing that you have to work to do. And so my writing style, if you want to call it that, has always just been a written version of what I would say. But I did find that people really connected to it. So I did have in my mind that I wanted to write a book, but I always envisioned it as more being just a memoir of sorts. So doing something like this was challenging in a different way, and it's not something I maybe saw coming.
Yeah, for sure. And Zoe, what about you? Because most of your writing is journalistic in nature. When did you always want to write a book? Was that always something that was in your future plans?
Oh, yeah. I mean, back when I was literally in the first grade, I won a young writers. I always knew I was going to be an author and a writer. But I think any project worth dedicating years of one's life to, it's going to ask more of you than you probably initially expect. And it's going to challenge you to get outside of your comfort zone and maybe approach things from a different perspective. Since most of my write is journalistic in nature, so I primarily lean on primary and secondary sources to sort of build a narrative around. I got comfortable getting uncomfortable and sharing my own sort of story and perspectives in this book to help sort of shore up some of the more evidence-based writing we were doing, and also demonstrate that, again, we really wanted to emphasize that this is a process. It's a process of dismantling ideas of perfection. And in order to really make that case, I think we necessarily had to bring in our own sort of first person lived experience to give a true and honest look at what these things look like, where the rubber meets the road. So while I'm very comfortable interviewing people, citing facts and figures, I had to really lean into some discomfort when it came to putting my own lived experience on the page.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking as a reader, like specifically as a reader, those were my favorite parts of the book, just going through. I found myself wanting, like, excited to get to the next little snippet. And I think, most readers, they are fascinated by the people behind the story. So it was wonderful. It enhanced the story. And that was definitely one of the best parts. But truly, when the book really opens, what you're talking about is the long game. It's this unrealistic idea of rapid progress that we see on social media, and how that sort of, success is unrealistic, both with running, environmental change, just life in general, parenthood, so many things. So why did you feel like that was a good place to open the book, sort of narrowing in on that fallacy of instant gratification? And why do you think that's such an important concept for today's runners to understand and to challenge?
Yeah, this is, this, Sarah. I've known you, 15 years now?
About that, yeah.
That for me, this has always been something, I have talked about my struggle with kind of validation and wanting to achieve. And I know I've always been someone who has been a high achiever, and recognizing Zoe's talked about this multiple times as well. And Sarah, I know you know this, and many of the listeners know this, that you think, well, if I just get this, or if I just do this, if I run this time, then I'll be happy, I'll be satisfied, I'll be content. And then for me, getting to the place where I did do that thing, which for you, I should say this side story. Zoe, you've never heard this story, but I got to tell it as a side note. For me, the running for Great Britain was the goal always. However, Zoe, I don't know if you know this, but I actually only got the call to run for Great Britain 3 days before. Yeah. And I was over here in the US, had to fly over. I'd already done my hard workout for the week. But about a month or two before that, I knew Great Britain were deciding on their team. And I got the phone call that I wasn't on the team. And Sarah was living with me at the time. And you came down the stairs, and I think that's one of the hardest I've ever cried in my life.
Yeah, I thought perhaps like maybe the house across the street blew up or something had happened. I was like, they were catastrophic tears. And then you told me, and my heart just broke a little bit for you. That was really hard.
Yeah, like it was one of those, like, you're like spitting because you can't like get the words out. And just like absolutely as if someone had died, to be honest. And that was such a dramatic moment. But I wanted to share that because Sarah was literally there when I found out I didn't get on the team, and that my reaction was, as you would expect for someone whose self-worth was tied in validation. But anyway, so when I achieved that and that didn't do it. It was like, okay, there's nothing that's going to do it here. And so for me, that was definitely an area I was fascinated in. Was like, why do we do that? I started to look at my childhood and be like, where did that come from? But I couldn't find anything. And then I noticed that, other people were really struggling with this too, at every level across the board. That's why one of the examples we used in the book was about someone finishing their 20-mile run and then seeing someone else has done 24. Because that's the kind of thing that happens with runners, and we can be really proud of ourselves about something. And then we see someone else who we maybe struggle with, who makes us feel like we're not good enough. And obviously it's nothing about them. It's about our own insecurities. But we just felt it was important to start with that because, as Zoe mentioned, you can't care for your community, you can't care for your planet, you can't care for the world around you if all you are doing is treating yourself horribly, especially if you're someone who treats other people, very well, but just not giving yourself that same understanding that you are enough regardless of what you achieve.
Yeah, I think, that period of unsustainability, you really do speak to that in the book, both, through college, through professional racing and all of that. And Zoe, I was really intrigued by your discussion of your unsustainability in trail running and how you kind of hit a low at what most people from the outside might look in and see as a high. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think, and this is like, just to be fully transparent, this is stuff that I think, at least for myself, I'm definitely still working through very actively, right? Like I haven't completely dismantled both like the interior circumstances that push me to consistently seek achievement. I also haven't dismantled like this current like social economic circumstances that I think really feed into a lot of our like personal insecurities around these things. So I'm, still very much like in the ick on this one. But, I feel like it's, I actually am not even sure which specific instance you're referring to, because I feel like it's something that I'm consistently working through in my own running, is that like anytime I stand on a podium, I've kind of encountered that same feeling of like having to really fight back against the voice inside that like tries to qualify whatever success I have, whether it's as an athlete or in my career, like, oh, well, you only got this because the other applicants weren't that strong, or like, oh, you're only on this podium because the girl who really should have come in third didn't end up racing at the last minute. Like, oh, you don't deserve this. This is luck. This is not you. So I think it's been like, just kind of a long-term process of continuing to understand that, my successes aren't just luck and my failures aren't just ability, and trying to like kind of stand in that tension in all things.
Yeah.
Sarah, can I ask you about your thoughts around that topic? Like you in your own career and now you're in writing, what to you spoke to you?
I think, there's a certain breed of horse in the world that will literally run and run and run until it dies. Like if the rider doesn't stop it. And I think so many times in my career, I've been that horse, just completely running myself into the ground. Mm-hmm. For me, it was this, you in the book, you open with this discussion about guilt versus shame. Guilt being I did bad, like you're looking at a performance and say, oh, the performance didn't go well. Shame being I am bad. And so I think that for me to stay above both of those things, it was this search for constant validation. You're only as good as your last race. And for me in particular, I think about going through college, those summers leading into freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, I was running 70 miles a week, and then 100, and then 120, and then 135, just going off the rails until I literally had a reaction of Bell's palsy. Half my face was paralyzed as a reaction to chronic fatigue. And so like I've reached points where literally like my body starts to fall apart. So I certainly understand. And back to that, that notion of guilt versus shame, I thought that was super interesting because no runner is immune to that. We all fall on one side or the other. And Zoe, in the book, in one of your little blurbs, you said, playing defense against my own sense of self-worth was a poor way to race and an even worse way to live. Each time I was passed by a fellow runner, it felt like a personal affront, a referendum on who I was as an athlete and a person. I'd think, I'm not good enough to be here. Of course I'm getting passed. I don't know why I even try. And I think those thoughts, that negative self-talk is so crucial to identify, because a lot of the time we're in a race and that happens and we don't even realize it's happening. So what for both of you, what are some ways that you combat that in racing and in life?
I think something that's helped me is like kind of at least starting from a place of acceptance and awareness around that. Like, I think particularly like among high achieving folks, among athletes, like probably the folks that listen to and identify with this podcast, they're going to index a little higher on having like a really strong inner critic. And I feel like, again, sort of like the circumstances of our world create the scenario where folks that have that feel initially very superficially like this gives them an edge, right? Like in a super competitive world, really competitive people for a time will thrive and sort of rise above. However, I think that all of us, like you've spoken to there, sort of reach that point where that maladaptation reaches the limits of its usefulness. And so it's like understanding where, like, again, making peace with the fact that like, yeah, like probably a long, long time ago, having that strong inner critic and desire to keep like acquiring more and doing better all the time was probably very useful when, my ancestors were just focused on like survival and, foraging for berries and capturing meat. But in this day and age, that I need I need a hardware update. And so just making peace with that, not being hyper judgmental of it, but also building awareness around what particular things trigger that, and where I can like combat that inner critic with, for me, things that are effective are leaning into self-compassion and also combating it with logic and more rational thinking.
Yeah. And sorry, go ahead, Tina.
Well, were you going to ask me the same question? Or?
Well, yes, but in the different light on the guilt versus shame. So I think you fall on the guilt side because later you say in speaking about your time at Ferris, you say, each time I didn't learn a thing, I lied to myself and blamed bad luck, Michigan weather, other people, anything but myself. All I could think of was getting back as quickly as I could. Most runners heed these warnings, but 20-year-old Tina was doing the equivalent of sticking her fingers in her ears and singing la, 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 la. So please, I feel like you're on the other side of that coin of you will ignore all of these signals. So please speak about that.
Well, and what's funny is you knew me during that time. Like you would have seen me, and you did see me trying to clamber my way back during that period. So Zoe, Sarah and I both went to D2 schools. We met our sophomore years and kind of been close ever since, even though we lived on different sides of the country. I mean, that period of my life, it was... I was so desperate to prove myself. I think for me, I guess this kind of is similar to being a sponsored athlete in the professional running world, but because I had come over there on a scholarship, I felt a lot of pressure to perform. They were paying for my schooling. There was all this money attached. There was all these investment in me. It was such a contrast to the way that I had grown up in terms of my high school coach, Brad, had very much been hands off, or not hands off, but very like pressure off, focus on lifelong running. And in many ways planted that seed in me at an early age, even if I lost that message for a few years. But yeah, I felt a lot of pressure to perform during that period of collegiate running. And I felt, and I know many of us have been through this, where I wanted to be the hardest worker. And Sarah, you and I have talked about this a lot, about how everyone stands on the start line and they're like, I'm the toughest one out here. No one is going to outwork me. Yeah. And we're all thinking that. And so that's what I was thinking with that period, is like, it's kind of the Rocky Balboa, Rocky IV, where he's like out in the snow and you're like, I'm in Russia, like running through the snow, and all of you are in your, like, especially me being in Michigan, was like, nobody is going to outwork me. I'm in northern Michigan. But it just wasn't sustainable. And as I said in that story, I ended up so lonely and isolated. And I remember one day, actually, I haven't shared this story before. I remember one day I was running with my team upon return from one of my injuries. And my teammate was like, oh, I have to run again later and I just don't want to. And I was like, oh, do you realize how lucky you are to be able to run twice a day? Because I was coming back from my injury and I was so ready to lose it at her, because she just was taking it for granted, which she was. But at the same time, that was my own jealousy of her, that she at that point could handle it. And I just kept trying to grip my way through it rather than actually step back and figure out what was going on. And I don't know if either of you have had this period, but I, during those times, worked so hard in the pool. And Sarah, you knew this when I was trying to come back to that national championship. And I was, as you know, was one of my proudest results, even though I finished runner-up one year, and a following year, finishing fifth with that injury leading up to it was one of my proudest results. But I feel like I worked so hard in the pool that I kind of almost destroyed myself a little bit in the process, in that my body never actually got any rest. It just was having to repair my muscles from how hard I was working in the pool. Thank you to AG1 for supporting Running for Real and sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. AG1 is the daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. I drink it literally every day. I gave AG1 a try because I knew that I wasn't getting all that I needed from my diet. As much as I tried, with life with a business and 2 young kids, I just couldn't get there. And AG1 allows me to fill in the gaps, to be kind of an insurance policy for my body, with 75 vitamins, minerals, whole food source ingredients, allowing me to get my prebiotics, my probiotics in one easy scoop that I put in water when I first wake up in the morning. I drink AG1 first thing I do, and it makes me feel like I can tackle the day. I can take on whatever comes my way, knowing that I started my day with that nutrition, with taking care of my body. And it is just an easy way to replace multiple different pills. You can replace your multivitamin, your probiotic, and more in one simple drinkable habit. They are raising the standard for quality in the supplement category, and it's going to help you build your health foundation first. So important here. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/Tina. That's drinkag1.com/Tina. Go check it out.
No, it is. It's just making me realize too, though, that even though that period of time, it's like that was before the big boom of social media. It makes me wonder, would it have been even worse, like magnified by everything you see on social media? So in reading the first half of this book, it did make me wonder, is there a place in a runner's life for social media? What is the place in a runner's life for social media? Because there's a lot in the bad column, in the negative side about social media. Is there a proper place for social media? Where is that in a runner's life?
Well, I mean, just to be really frank, I wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for social media. As a journalist, that's a huge way for me to sort of get my message out there, build my brand, build my platform and portfolio. And I think until we come up with a better sort of way of networking, we can't I would love for social media to disappear. Trust me, I do not love that place. It has not brought a ton of positivity into my life. But again, it has been a big way for me to get my message, my work, my writing out there. And it's also how I met Tina. I actually have a lot of really wonderful friends that I did meet through social media. So it is a way of really building strong, powerful, and authentic connections. But those things really only thrive when you take them offline too, right? So I think what enabled Tina and I to truly become friends is sure, we met on Twitter, but I got her phone number, or I gave her my phone number very, very quickly. And we pretty soon took that conversation offline. So I think until our economy stops being incredibly tied to social media, it's not going to go away. And we have to just make sure we temper all of our conversations about it with understanding sort of that economic necessity, right? I work in digital media. If social media disappeared overnight, that would be a huge loss of revenue for us, a huge loss of traffic and attention. So there's good with the bad, but the way that our economy is currently set up, particularly the attention economy, I don't see this going away anytime soon. So I think it behooves us to have serious conversations kind of about our boundaries, our tolerances, and understanding that this is likely going to be a part of our lives for quite a while. How do we navigate this world with as much self-compassion as grace as we possibly can?
Yeah. Recently over the last, actually since the book has come out, I've been kind of going through a bit of a conversation with social media, I suppose, in my mind. Zoe, you commented on this when we were together last in Leadville. I have the app limit set on my phone to say 15 minutes is what I'm allowed in a day. And Sarah, we've talked about the amount of time we spend on it. And I remember you saying how do you spend that little? And I had this pride point of look at me, I keep my social media under 15 minutes a day. Although as Zoe watched me do, and someone at the time, I can't remember who, was why do you have this app limit on when you just hit ignore anyway? But you said, well, at least it makes you think, which it does. However, I think I was getting to the point where I was starting to feel shame around hitting that ignore button, because I was I need to be creating these things. And that is part of my creative process right now is writing social media posts, creating things. And every time that I hit that, I feel shame around it. Oh God, here I go again. I'm ignoring it. And so I've been getting to a place recently where if I'm on there creating, it actually does help me to feel good. And so I think that for me is one key unlock, has been when you go on there and you just absorb, it very easily spirals and takes you to a negative place, because all you see between whatever the algorithm has decided for you is funny and relevant. Sarah, mine is all toddler, first child, second child, toddlers doing this. Mine is all that. And that does bring me joy.
Me too. Yeah.
As long as I'm creating, when you're just absorbing, that's when it can spiral. But if you start putting things out there as well, then I find, at least for me, that helps, because I feel like I'm doing something, but also getting my creative quick hit of creativity, I suppose, while my life is not allowing for like a chunk of an hour that I can dedicate to creativity.
Yeah, it's balance, right? So I think that's one of the reasons that you included talking about mindfulness and meditation in the book, because it's taking something like social media where if you're just consuming, okay, instead of that like constant scrolling, doom scrolling, as bad as it gets, it's important to balance that with something like mindfulness and meditation. And in the book, you say, running requires the same physical motion over and over. Meditation is doing mental reps. We've trained our minds to wander just as we've trained our legs to run long distances. Think of meditation as adding speed work to our training. It takes a little while to get used to the variation, but once we get going, we improve a little more every day. I thought that was such a perfect way of describing meditation. So this is a question for both of you. Do you have a meditation practice? What does that look like from day to day?
Yeah, I mean, I've struggled with having a pretty dysregulated nervous system for a lot of my adult life. And so it's been having a meditation routine, which is just like for me, 10 to 15 minutes a day. I particularly like the Headspace app because it kind of allows me to habit track, which is helpful for me in building routines. I also just really like, I believe his name is Andrew Puttycomb's charming British accent. And it makes me feel totally different in my brain and in my body when I'm in that practice. I was very reluctant to adopt a meditation and breathwork practice because I am not a very relaxed person. I am very fidgety. Stillness is a place of discomfort for me. Not feeling productive sort of stretches my comfort limits. And I think that that's why it's such an important practice for me, is because it really forces me to sit with discomfort. And I think my sort of like aha moment was like, wow, like sitting still, not doing stuff, not like having the immediate gratification of like doing something that feels superficially productive really was my growth edge. And it's not always easy for me, but I have noticed like I feel really differently mentally and physically how I show up in the world when I'm in that practice. And so particularly for people who, again, like me, and every time they heard someone else talk about their meditation practice, like have the biggest, most performative eye roll possible. Like, oh my God, can't wait to hear about your Burning Man experience. You are the person that most needs to lean into that.
A quick side note before I answer that. I shared this on social media the other day, but I saw this meme, I think it was, and it was like, I'm so over Burning Man, can't we have Wet Woman, where we sit around a circle and and like hug one another and talk about how much we love that land and can give back to the earth. And I just like, yes.
I'm so
no
there.
tech CEOs invited.
So I kind of come to this from a different place right now. I do believe that we go through variations and should go through variations of what we can do. When I first moved into this house, I was really into a meditation practice, no more than 15 minutes. So that was during my late pregnancy and then going into the first year of Chloe's life. I was very good with it. However, as you know, Sarah, with young kids, it is just so unpredictable that I would find myself, if they woke up early, I would get so angry that I was like, I can't just have this 15 minutes to myself to do this one thing. Or I would sacrifice sleep so I could get it in because I needed to be awake enough to where I didn't fall asleep again. And so I found for me, or if I picked the middle of the day, I'm going to do it during their nap. It would just happen to be the day they would wake up in their nap. And it just wasn't serving me, even though it was intended to, and it would have. There was so many variables that I couldn't control that I found it stressful. So for me now, rather than doing that, I've been through phases of journaling. I've been through phases of gratitude practice, and those work. But I just kind of feel more it's better to just go with what feels right. So for me, a lot of the time now, it's like, hey, so right now we are in that beautiful phase, where my favorite time of year, where I can have the windows open at night and it cools down overnight. I can wake up to the orange out of my window, out of the doors where the window is open. So I can see the sun coming up. I can see the silhouette of the trees. I can hear the noises. So that I take 5 minutes where I just appreciate the morning. Or when I'm out on a run, I very much likes to touch the bark of trees. I did it multiple times today, like just to ground myself. And that's not like a meditation practice as such, but it's a grounding experience. Or like taking where I have 5 minutes between things to, instead of just grabbing emails and, I'll quickly do this, being like, I'm just going to go sit outside and just look and be. So for me, I'm finding at the moment the best thing to do for me is those unstructured, still uncomfortable because you always are going to try and stuff that time with things. But those unstructured things that just connect me to the earth. That's what I'm finding is my version of that right now.
Yeah. No, I think
the operative word there is practice, right? Like, and I think this is, maybe Tina will identify with this, but like, I'm someone who's driven towards perfection and performance, and practice is the opposite of that. It's about sitting in the messiness and the fact that this is just about sort of being present in your imperfection. It's about just showing up regardless of the outcome. And I think that's one of the reasons that it was really hard for me, is it sort of forced me to just like engage very imperfectly with the same thing over and over again with no guarantee of outcome. And I think that practice also hints at exactly what Tina said, that this should be flexible and adaptable over time. It should be in conversation with what your needs and your challenges are in the moment.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely a good way to put it, that it is practice. That's part of becoming, as you talked about earlier. And I thought that was a perfect discussion to wrap up part one of the book. And for those who don't know, the book is broken up rather brilliantly, actually, into three parts. Part two being sustain your running community, where you discuss this benefit of individual improvement through group experiences, and you really dive into that. I really liked the chapter about mentoring others, but I wanted to know for both of you, what have been your greatest mentors as you have worked through these last, let's say, 10 or 15 years of running and training?
I mean, my biggest mentor that comes, I feel like I've been so fortunate in that I've had so many friends and people who have played different roles in my life in teaching me things about the world, you two both being examples of this for me. But for me, the biggest person that comes to mind, maybe more than 15 years ago, I've mentioned him once already, as my high school coach. The fact that I look back on him now and he held me back, and it annoyed the hell out of me at the time. But he knew enough that he was not going to get my name next to his when I ran my best times. But he knew that, he was the one that taught me, if something hurts, take 3 days off. Like, don't overthink it. Take 3 days, let it reset, and then try again. If it hurts, then go see a medical professional. He also was the one that had this lifelong perspective that, as I said earlier, I think instilled in me this message of like, your long-term body is more important than any one result. And so he is someone that comes to mind for me, not only instilling the seeds that then took 20 years to come through in terms of this book, but he having the humility to not be the one that got the credit for that. Mm-hmm. I just thought that was such a beautiful example. And I'm just, he's really someone who comes to mind for me as that mentor of what I want to be long-term.
What about you, Zoe?
Yeah, I think I've been with my coach, David Roche, since 2018, and he's been a huge influence in my life, not just like on the trails and roads, but also sort of always being someone I can triangulate questions and experiences on around like my professional career and my writing as well. He's been a trusted editor and friend for me. I'll also say that like one of the most beautiful gifts from writing this book is that Tina has become a big part of my life. And I feel like we, originally started with like a really amicable, like wonderful professional relationship. And now I would consider her one of my closest friends and confidants, and someone that I just always trust to like tell me hard truths, to listen when I need to be listened to hold me accountable to my potential. And I think having someone that you can trust in that way it's a rare gift in this world.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And I think, Tina, like you said, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I've had a lot of reasons to look up to you personally, but one of them actually was later in this same section of the book, you talked about your experience as a guide. running as a guide. And I again, you made me cry a couple times in the book, but I teared up reading this. And I just, I know we're a little bit short on time, but if you can briefly talk about what was that process like? How does someone become a guide, and talk us through, running a race as a guide?
Yeah, I can't remember I was going to talk about that earlier for some reason, but I didn't. I think it was when you were talking about finding a place where, or when you are struggling in a race, what you think about, or like how you get through that piece of when things aren't going well. For me, I had to flip back the other direction. I tried to do the middle ground of like still competing, but not at the top level, and it just didn't work. So for me, guiding was a way to get me out of that mindset and give back. And it was just the most beautiful experience. I'm so thankful to Mike Wardian for introducing me to that world. And I have really met the most incredible people who have been through so much. I mean, recently having run, part of Leadville with Brian Reynolds, who's a double amputee, and getting to know him as a person, but also get to see him work through these things and just the challenges that he's been through. It just inspires me, but also there's so many beautiful people that I have met through this experience that, I can't imagine not doing it now. I don't do many races, like quote unquote, for myself. And I really love being there for these pioneers, although I also do feel a lot for them because there is so much pressure on their shoulders that the rest of us don't see, of where they want to be the first person to do something. They want to be the one who, the role model for the person that they didn't have as a child. But that's a lot of pressure to carry around, being the first to do something when it is something like you have Down syndrome, or you're double amputee, or you have 5% vision. Like, I think I suck in a lot of their energy and struggle with that sometimes, that I want to help them more. But I think at the end of the day, what they need is someone who believes in them. And that's something I can give them.
Well, that's the beautiful part about it, though. And I think that for me was the big takeaway from section 2, which is that when you give of yourself to your running community, you get back tenfold what you give. And that right there is a perfect example about that. Zoe, what about you? Is that something you might be interested in the future, perhaps? I don't know if you have been a guide. I don't know if I caught that or not.
Yeah, I do mostly locally here. One of my good training partners, Kyle Kuhn, is a Paralympic triathlete, but we'll forgive him for being a triathlete. And I think, again, like it really just like when else am I going to train with an Olympian, Yeah. And like, I love running trails with him because he's just like my ideal training partner, just super chatty, amazing zone 2 sort of situation. And because we're tethered together, it really just connects us. And like, as a very social animal, I really love that and cherish that. And I just feel like for me, guiding puts me in the path of other outstanding athletes that I learned from. I know it's such a cliche. And, I would never say that anyone, they do not exist to teach and or inspire me, but I necessarily just by, sort of the function of being around that level of excellence that, Paralympians require, I absorb a lot. It pushes me, it challenges me. And I think that, that's just something I really enjoy and I really treasure about guiding as well.
Can I just add, as I didn't say this earlier on, where can people go, as you asked that? Visually Impaired Runners United in Stride, but I would actually start with Achilles.org. That's the biggest group that is going to have chapters all over the world. So if people want to sign up at Achilles.org, you can get hooked up with someone in your area, or even just find someone who's doing a race that you've always wanted to do and they're looking for someone to run with them. And it can be all kinds of different ability levels and challenges that they're working through. Thank you to Allbirds for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast and for supporting me in my journey. Today, I want to talk to you about the Women's Tree Dasher 2. Now, I will be wearing these as I start going through these major marathons where I work long days. When I was at the Chicago Marathon last year, I worked a 13-hour day, multiple days in a row, and I wore my Women's Tree Dasher 2 every day. They were incredibly comfortable. Even when I walked back into my hotel room late at night, I did not have any aches and pains. I love the amount of colors that they come in. My favorite is definitely the Calm Cargo, which is kind of like a greeny colored. As you know, I do love green as it is a naturey color. They are very comfortable. They have great stability. And of course, as is all birds, they are passionate environmentally. They are doing the work. They are a B Corp and a highly rated B Corp at that. So that means they are doing what they need to do to be an environmentally sustainable company and relentlessly sticking to that. And so I encourage you to go check out the Tree Dashers if you have something for work, a work job that allows you to wear a pair of trainers, or just for traveling, for when you're on your feet for a lot of time, or just day to day. You will often see me wearing these shoes. They are my go-to. And if you go to allbirds.com, you can go check them out. And also, if you use the link in the show notes, you can get yourself a free pair of socks with your order when you add those to your cart using that link in the show notes. Go check it out at allbirds.com.
Yeah, perfect. If nothing else, part 2 is just chock full of like absolutely fabulous resources for how to get involved in your community. Now, let's just call a spade here. This book, the first 2/3 could have served as a very good standalone running book. So walk me through your decision to include activism as part 3.
I think we couldn't not include that, Zoe and I. That's kind of our our main. In some ways, I think it was almost the opposite, that we needed to tiptoe people into the conversation. Because if they just saw it was about environmentalism, people would be like, "Yeah, I'll read that another time."
Yeah. I mean, if we wrote a book that was like why you should be an environmental activist, like that isn't good. I mean, let's just, be real. That's not going to have this. We're not going to get the same audience. And it's not that we were trying to do a bait and switch. We wanted to lay out an argument that gently brought people to their own conclusion that being an activist is necessary for being the runner they want to be, right? Like, if you are obsessed with your own running, totally self-centered, totally self-serving, but you've never once stopped to consider like where the sidewalks you run on come from and why they exist, like that's a pretty narrow view of the world, right? Like wherever you're running, if it's a trail, sidewalk, street, whatever it is, unless you're running on the treadmill in your own house every single day forever, you're not training in a vacuum. You need clean air, clean water, and safe, accessible terrain to run on. And those things only exist because of political actions undertaken by others. And wouldn't it be great if all of us runners got involved to advocate for the shared resources that we all need, viewing safety as a shared resource, water, air, sidewalk, trail, whatever it is, like these things only exist because people have gotten politically active. So we wanted to sort of defang the scary idea of like being an activist is like, requires being literally Greta Thunberg and like dropping out of school. It can look like a lot of things and we all need to get involved. I remember once I was presenting at a trail running conference and it was during the 2020 election. And I remembered looking up and seeing that there were more people in the US who identified as trail runners than people who work in the coal mining industry. And I was like, oh my God, we could be like we could be a real powerful sort of like force for political action here. And I think we're pretty values aligned when it comes to a lot of these things. Like, wouldn't it be amazing for people to start to like lean into that identification as runners, as outdoor athletes, and start to advocate for the political structures that support that identity?
Yeah. Didn't we get a perfect example of this for everyone, at least here in the US, earlier this year when we were having air quality from the fires in Canada? I mean, people who had previously said, well, I look outside my window and everything looks just fine. Suddenly, a lot of people couldn't run outside and it was dangerous to run outside. And so it really brought home that message of, oh, wow, this is here right now. It can affect me. And even if I don't have effects of climate, even though I don't live in Florida where there's hurricanes coming through, if I can't breathe the air outside, then I can't go on my run outside. And so I think Zoe's right that we are going to be a group for change, because air quality is going to become more and more an issue. And if nothing else, that reminds those runners who don't tend to think about that this is affecting you too. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, Zoe's right. Like the book is not a bait and switch. It doesn't read like a bait and switch. It simply starts on a micro level and says, okay, like here are the issues that cause unsustainability as an individual. And then you widen that to your running community, and then you widen that to the planet. So my question is, if every single person that read this book chose to do just one thing for change, what would that one thing be? And the answer might be different for both of you, but what would that one thing be if you could choose?
Vote every time you can. Every election, no matter how small. School board, county commissioner, vote. Do your research and vote.
I agree, although I'm not an American citizen, so that makes it a bit challenging on my part. I do need to take that step. I just, speak about overwhelming the concept of doing that process. I just can't seem to.
I feel like we also haven't been doing a great job of join our club.
Fair. But what would I? Yeah, I mean, I would echo that, although that feels a bit hypocritical saying that, as I am not doing that here. But beyond that, I would say talking about it in whatever capacity that means to you. I mean, Zoe just mentioned there, school board, bringing up conversations around that. I mean, my daughter's the preschool they go to. There's 4 classrooms per year group. So from age 2 to 5, they now compost there because I was like, hey, do you think you could do this? And we had conversations around it, and now they're doing it. So just bringing it up to people. A lot of the time people don't think, or they don't know that you care about that. Talking about it as much as possible, explaining your reasonings why you're doing things. Oh, we're taking the train up here because then we're not, taking flights which are carbon emissions that we don't have to be putting out there. Or, we chose to get a hybrid car because we couldn't afford an electric car yet, but we could get a hybrid car. So at least we're minimizing our impact. So talking about your decisions and, being vocal, I would say.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. And I think, obviously part 3 is definitely pretty significant in as far as research and data and anecdotes. Can you just tell me briefly, we'll kind of wrap up, and then I've got some real silly questions for the two of you, but out of curiosity, what was the research process like for this book? Because it is extensive. I'll be honest, there's a really good, data that's backing up a lot of the things you're saying in this book.
I mean, for me, I feel like it was just kind of that feels like that's just the bare minimum of work required to put forth an argument. As a journalist, I'm a very curious person. So I feel like in the writing process, whenever I'm trying to argue something, I'm always curious to dig that one level deeper and say, why do I want people to vote? Why is it important to vote in school election? Why? And keep just getting down to the bedrock of evidence that's there.
And I think, with the earlier chapters, there's a lot of this that makes sense. Logically, you're like, okay, well, yeah, I have noticed that I ran under 4 hours, which was my goal that I just wanted so bad. And then I did notice actually that as soon as I got 4 hours, I was like, well, why can't I do 3.5 hours? So it's easier to put those steps together. Whereas with the environmental piece, there's too much. The climate deniers are the loudest people out there. And it can make them seem like they're a bigger chunk of the population than they are.
All 6 of them.
Yes. And so we had to have that because we needed to be able to show people this is not just us making things up and being dramatic. And that's another narrative that the media and those deniers and people who don't want to talk about this continue to pull is oh, they're dramatic and oh, they're over the top and oh, they're exaggerating. But so we needed to have that to show that this is we're not just yelling about this because we want to get attention drawn on ourselves. We're doing this because we believe in humanity and this planet that we live on, and we recognize that this should not be here. The chance of this exact situation we live in, this perfect planet that is even a centimeter to the right place from the sun, it's just so perfect that how could we not want to care about this? So why would we not speak up about it? But for a lot of people that's not enough, so we needed the words behind it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a very good reason to have just backup, to get down, as Zoe said, to the brass tacks of why why does this matter? So is there any other, before we move on to our questions, is there any other final takeaways that you'd like to share to maybe someone who's on the fence about buying the book? Is there any other final takeaways from the book you'd like to share before we move on?
I think that there's just something for everyone, right? Like not every bit of the book is going to resonate with everyone, and that's okay. That was never our intention. We wanted to write something that was self-aware and imperfect and was just more of an invitation and a challenge than like a definitive, like perfect sort of like linear narrative. So, you know, for anyone that's on the book, like, or that's on the fence, like there will be something that will resonate with you in here. There will be something that challenges you, and there will be something that you don't like. And I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah. And I've had feedback from a few people that have said that they enjoyed that this wasn't a book they felt they had to read cover to cover, that they could go to specific chapters as they felt like it. And I think that's a really good point. Like, you know, we do have a chapter on traveling to races. So maybe you read that chapter when you are getting ready to head out to an event. Maybe you are going through a tough period in your life and going through one of the major life challenges that we talked about. And you need that reminder that it's okay if your runs just end up being easy every day, because that's all mentally and physically you can handle. So I think, well, Zoe said, you know, there's something for everyone. There's also going to be something for you at different periods in your life. So it's a book you can go back to depending on where you are at that point.
Yeah, agreed. It is a book that, you know, if you prefer, you can sip it and not chug it, and that's fine. Now, in writing this book and becoming friends, I have to assume that the two of you got to know each other pretty well. So I've actually pulled a few questions from the Newlywed Game to see how well you know each other.
I'm good at this stuff. Oh, God.
Well, we'll start with Zoe then. Let's see. Zoe, do you happen to know what is Tina's guilty pleasure?
I don't even know what my answer would be for this.
I'm going to try to like jujitsu this. Tina doesn't experience guilt around pleasure. She knows that it's okay to like what you like, and that she doesn't judge herself that way.
That's beautiful and perfect. Yeah. I would have said 10 years ago, Tina would have said ice cream, but now she'd say, screw it. Why should I feel bad for eating ice cream? That would have been.
We don't feel bad for eating ice cream.
No, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
It's an important source of calcium.
Yes. Yes.
All right, Tina, Zoe has a day off. What does she do with her day off?
I would say is this a cop-out by saying she would go find somewhere beautiful to run and connect with the land? Is that a cop-out answer? Or she could maybe be working on her improv and trying to resist the urge to check her email.
Is that right, Zoe?
That feels accurate, yes.
Okay, Zoe, does Tina keep a diary or a journal?
She journals periodically, but not consistently.
Tina, weigh in on that?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, Tina, you and Zoe are planning to meet, and she tells you she's going to bring takeout for dinner. Which restaurant does it come from?
A good vegan eats, some kind of vegan plant-based food. If I have to give a genre, let me think. Probably pizza.
Zoe?
That's correct.
All right, Zoe, what does Tina want to be doing career-wise 5 years from now?
I think she would just love for sort of the running Real-Isodes community to continue to, not grow, to grow and to sort of be nurtured in a sustainable, like really self-sustaining kind of way, and tend to it like a garden.
I like that answer.
While continuing to apply her expertise at like partnering with events to help them become more sustainable.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Tina?
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
All right. And finally, Tina, what do you think Zoe is most proud of?
I am going to go out on a limb here, Zoe. I'm not sure this is the right answer, and maybe it's something more like checkboxy, but I would say working through your relationship with your body.
Yeah, that feels, yeah. Okay. I don't know if I have like a pride hierarchy necessarily, but that one is definitely up there.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. I would say it's fair to say you know each other very well. All right, let's just tell people where they can get their hands on a copy of Becoming a Sustainable Runner and where they can connect with you.
Go, Zoe.
Yeah, if you go to becomingasustablerunner.com, it'll point you to all sorts of retailers, both independent and less independent, where you can buy your copy. You can also request your local bookstore or library, which is a favorite option of mine. Also available in an ebook and forthcoming audiobook format, voiced by the lovely Tina.
And where can they find you?
Oh, I write for Trailer Runner, Women's Running and Outside Online. Those are my primary bylines, and you can find me on Instagram at carrot_flowers_lowercase z.
Wait, I have never asked you about this. Why is it carrot flowers? I've never asked you this.
It's from a Neutral Milk Hotel song. So I really like
awesome.
90s music.
I love that so much. So many people ask me that, and I'm like, I actually don't know.
Yeah,
so
I just really like. I mean, honestly, when I got super stoned one day in college and decided to change my handle.
Well,
and I just think it's funny, so I left it.
That's amazing. It's perfect.
Well, on that rather remarkable note, we're going to go ahead and say goodbye. Thank you for tuning in. Go get your copy of the book, and we will see you next time on the Running for Real podcast.
Thank you so much, Sarah. You did an amazing job as always. I appreciate you. And come listen to Sarah and I's for Real-Isodes on Wednesdays. Before we go any further, I just want to give a quick shout out to the Running for Real team. Without them, I would not be able to do barely anything compared to what I'm able to do today. They are behind the scenes. They are there for me. I am just so appreciative of them. To Jeremy Nessel, our podcast editor, audio consultant, and someone who's been with me since the start. To Sally Pontarelli, our content and operations manager, who is there day to day doing all the things to help me be successful. To Kelsey Wang, our head of design, and Louise Murphy, our associate designer. And finally, to Sandy Gutierrez, our photographer and content strategist. I am appreciative of all of you and wouldn't be able to do what I do without you. I really hope you enjoyed that episode today. I thought Sarah did a fantastic job. I really loved the questions that she came up with. I love that I had both of those two women who I really admire in the same place at the same time. And it was just a really enjoyable conversation. I want to remind you to go to the show notes to get yourself a copy of Becoming a Sustainable Runner if you have not already got yourself one. And if you haven't left a review on Amazon, I would really appreciate your support there. That is the biggest and best thing you can do to support us, other than, of course, purchasing the book yourself. And in the show notes, you can also find links to our sponsors. So be sure to go check out 2before. You can get that 30% off using code TINA. So go to 2before, that's the number 2before.com. There's a link in the show notes. You can also get AG1, that special offer, by going to drinkag1.com/Tina. And also thank you to Allbirds. There is a link there. So when you add a pair of socks to your cart, you will get it for free when you purchase your order, when you use the link in the show notes. So thank you to those sponsors. You can find all that information and links to Sarah, Zoe, and I by going to runningforreal.com/episode 368. I will see you on Wednesday with Sarah again for another For Real-Isode. And then next Friday, another regular episode. I'll see you then.